Next up, we have the second session of a two-part series called Data Pandemic. The point of these talks is to hear from companies that are doing something unique with their data strategy in response to COVID-19. When the world went digital overnight, many companies were flat on their heels, not having easy access to newer data to harness new behavioral patterns in their analytics. These talks address the impact to data strategy resulting from this massive shift in the way we all live and work. We have an exceptional moderator to lead us through these discussions, and I'll turn it over to Tony Baer to introduce himself and get us started.
Okay, thank you, Jess, and thank you all for joining us wherever you are, whenever you are. That's the beauty, I guess, of virtual sessions. We're in the second installment in Data Nova on Data Pandemic. In our first session, we looked at basically what is a problem that's just very urgent, to all of us, which is, basically progress on research to essentially to cope with this disease and to tame this pandemic. And on this go around, we're taking a look at basically how this really impacts organizations, whether it basically be enterprises, whether it be public sector agencies, to navigate what's essentially basically very changing times. The common thread through all this is that data is really important. Data is important in terms of understanding this disease, understanding every aspect of it. And data is also very important for organizations to navigate through this landscape. If we had this discussion, say a year ago, I guess to be February, I don't think anybody would have had any idea of the types of huge transformations that the entire world was going to have to go through in a matter of weeks. Today, we're going to be talking to two people who basically are involved with solutions that probably many of you know. And they're at different ends of the information lifecycle, and they're both equally important ends of the information lifecycle. To take a look at just, how do we need to treat data and look at this in a situation, in this pandemic, which is really a time of extreme transformation and upheaval. First up, we'll basically be speaking with Andrew Beers. He's CTO of Tableau, and Andrew, I believe you were there from almost the very beginning there. You've been at Tableau, according to my notes here, for going on 16 years and more. You're now currently Chief Technology Officer. You've always been about product development there, and always been about developing product that basically puts power in the hands of individuals. I mean, what Tableau really, the contribution that I really see Tableau did is that you guys actually came through on the promise that originally was made when BI first originated, which was basically right. Information at everybody's desktop. You guys actually really made that happen. And then after that, we'll be talking with Kaycee Lai. He's CEO and founder of Promethium, which is all about data discovery. Because if you're going to use Tableau, you better know what type of data you're looking for. And Kaycee has been involved with, previous to that, he was also basically CEO of Waterline Data. Always been about discovering data and cataloging it. And so therefore, these are very necessary steps in the information lifecycle. So with that, Andrew, I'd like to turn over the microphone to you and give us a little bit of your perspective on basically how in this pandemic, we need to really look at how we treat data.
Thanks, Tony. It's really good to be here and to talk about just that very topic about how businesses can use data to drive transformation. We think that every organization needs to quickly and effectively adapt to change. I think you set that up very well in the introduction. The challenge has always been how to do that. And one way people do that is through new technologies. And we've seen lots of innovation in this space. Promethium is with us here today, and they're a fast-growing startup. We've seen companies like Starburst and Databricks both receive major funding this year. And now that Tableau is part of Salesforce, we're trying to bring our technologies together to help organizations and people do more with data. We can't just wait for the next software release. Like, the time for change is now. We need to transform and run our businesses very quickly right now. And so we're seeing successful organizations everywhere double down on the use of data and analytics to help achieve this. And we think data is an incredibly powerful way for people to connect, to drive this kind of change. And companies are using it to navigate through these new realities that we face this year. So let's look at some examples. Let's take Starbucks. Their coffee houses are known for being that friendly place where people come together to get their coffee and connect with others in their community. But they're also a company that really knows how to use data and innovation to leverage change. So when COVID-19 hit, Starbucks had to shutter their stores for the first time ever, for the first time in history. And like many companies, they had to quickly move from this traditionally in-person experience to an all-digital one. And they had to do this while maintaining excellent service for all their customers. And today you can make your Starbucks order through your mobile app and safely pick up your drink all contactless. But it takes more than a mobile app to make that possible. So Starbucks relied on data to help transform their business pretty much overnight. It helped them really ensure that their technology and the experiences they wanted to put together worked flawlessly at every point of contact, whether it's being in store or at the curbside pickup or doing an online order delivery. So in all the conversations I've had with Starbucks, I was really impressed that how they empowered people across their organization, regardless of their position, with the right data to make the most out of any moment in their customer lifecycle. Their thinking was that you could take the value of data and the power that came from it and make it greater by making it shared between everybody that needs it. For instance, we know that Starbucks is not only a go-to destination for coffee, but they're also known for having clean bathrooms. So they developed this way for store partners, their employees, to quickly enter data about the stores they were in, which amenities were open and closed, and then surface this information not only in relevant reports, but ultimately out to all of their customers. And that's just an example of the way Starbucks is using data to really transform their customer experience and exceed those expectations. But there's a lot of organizations out there that have legacy systems and perhaps outdated processes that hold them back from really effectively using data like this. And to make matters worse, some organizations have as a norm to restrict information from others inside the organization. And we think this really needs to change. And I know this habit comes from people thinking about security, but if you're not careful, these security concerns alone can stifle the kind of transformation that companies need to do. It's really hard to transform your business when you and those around you just don't have access to the right information to make the right decisions. So we found that successful informations lean a little bit more towards how to share the best information rather than how to control it. They normalize the idea of having access to and sharing data. And in some situations, without this kind of transparency, just nothing would work. So again, rewind almost a year ago, cities across the world were trying to figure out how to best respond to this pandemic. And New York was in the eye of the storm, right? As COVID cases were really surging there. They had to activate their citywide emergency response effort. They had to coordinate across many different components of the city's emergency operations. Think, emergency call services and PPE supplies and ICU bed capacity and other things like that. These resources were all stretched to the max, and there were lives at stake. And the city really needed to make some critical decisions with trusted data that they brought together from multiple sources. So New York and some of their partnering agencies used Tableau to securely combine a bunch of data and gain visibility across all of their pandemic response efforts. They connected their data to critical external sources, partner information, public health status updates, economic indicators, government policy, et cetera, to track and manage their pandemic response. And that meant the government leaders could look at emergency call data to anticipate where maybe the next outbreak might be happening, or ambulances could be routed to quickly to hospitals that had beds available. And without data transparency, New York would not have been able to be successful at this. So we think more organizations are going to have to lean into this way of looking at data. Because we find that when organizations can bring together their data with data from other trusted sources, they can explore even more possibilities for the use of data to drive transformation. And we think that this can be helped by having more trusted public data sources. And for this reason, we created the Tableau COVID-19 Data Hub in combination with a bunch of trusted data partners, because we wanted to provide a single destination where individuals and organizations could find data about the pandemic, like case positivity rates and how we're managing vaccines, et cetera. It also has some great dashboards so people can get started right away. But we launched this because we wanted people to have the best data about what was a really rapidly evolving health crisis. And businesses made use of it as well. So in fact, Verizon uses the data from the Data Hub in some of their dashboards to enhance their customer service during the pandemic. So with the data, they've been able to better anticipate customer needs across all the touch points they have with them, be it their call centers, their web apps, their mobile applications, even when their techs go out in the field and work with the customers directly. In addition to Verizon, we have many other global brands that are leveraging the data in the data hub to help improve their customer experience. You know, Lockheed Martin, UNICEF, Deloitte Canada, Stanford Medical, I could go on and on. Lots of companies are using this data. So we think if you're trying to make the right investments right now in data, you should design a strategy to help your organization quickly and effectively adapt to change and transform how you need to transform your business. These adaptive organizations really have a culture that's nimble and durable. They've figured out how to make the right decisions fast. They don't rely on just a few data analysts to find opportunities, and they don't focus on keeping their data on lockdown. They really try and create multiple paths to help lots of people find meaningful insights. And they empower everyone across their organization to make use of data and make database decisions. So we think if you do this, you'll be able to transform your business in the way that some of the customers in my examples did today. So thanks, Tony, and back to you.
The question I really have here is like, how do you, basically, how do you make this basically empowerment viral within an organization? And taking a look at what we've had to go through over this past year, basically transformation has not been a theoretical point. It's not, it hasn't been a PowerPoint, slide. It's been, a necessity, whether you're basically a private business or a public sector organization. What's the key, to basically, getting this empowerment going, especially as it basically means essentially kind of changing a lot of old habits?
It's a fantastic question. We talk a lot about having a really good data culture inside a company. And data culture for us has a bunch of different parts. Part of it is just, making sure that people are literate in the use of data. You can do this a lot with education. You can do this a lot with having the right champions inside an organization. Part of data culture is having the right access to data, making sure that people can bring data into their decision-making by making sure it's out there. But it's also about really supporting a community. It's not really going to be just a top-down mandate. It's got to be something that you can get a lot of people involved in and really supporting and learning from each other. So, we've seen organizations be really effective by having these almost like these little mini conferences inside the business where people will come and they say, we had this problem, we wanted to take a database solution, and they'll walk people through the process of asking the right questions and collecting the right data. And then, ultimately like how they looked at the data and then the business processes they changed because of it. And that is the kind of, that can set up this cycle that just reinforces itself, because people can see, people that take these database approaches, they have success, they get rewarded, they teach people around them. So build a really great data culture is the way to get this thing going across the whole organization.
That's a whole conversation in and of itself. We may return to that later. But Kaycee, I'd like to switch over to shift over to you, which is that it's not just about any data. You need to find the right data. Discovery is just a huge part of this process. So give us your perspective here.
It all starts with discovery, right? I mean, if you can't even know what data you have, and if you can't get to it, you're sort of crippled at the very beginning. And that's something that, we've always been very passionate about, here at Promethium is, we want to help companies not just find the data, but also help them actually get the data in a way where it actually makes sense and people actually know what to do with that, right? And so that's actually kind of the big aha moment that we had was, sometimes a lot of organizations, have implemented policies and products where, they can quote unquote find data. And, what we were told by a lot of customers was, that's nice, but when I have so much of it, telling me where, 8 million tables are, it's just really step one. And it's really finding what I need and finding what's relevant and finding what I can actually leverage is actually becoming, much more important. And what we've seen is that a lot of organizations actually have a lot of time-consuming and complex tasks that they have to go through, even after they find the data to, get it in a way where, they can leverage great solutions like Tableau to, quickly gain insights so they can take actions. And so, what we're saying is, especially with the pandemic, is that, more than ever, people realize they not only need to know what they're looking for, but they need to be able to find it quickly. And the data needs to be fresh, right? I think one of the things we saw in the pandemic was that organizations who were able to very quickly respond and adapt by making data-driven decisions, they did really well. And unfortunately, a lot of the practices that we helping customers is that we see a lot of companies, their process, relied on, getting data to the business maybe once a month or once every 3 months. And so that becomes obviously a challenge, in this new day and age. And so that's something that Promethium is actually very passionate about. We were able to, help a large company in Korea, CJ Group, working with our partner CJ Olive Networks, where they own a huge, they're a huge conglomerate owning many businesses spanning across retail, food, entertainment, etc. And when the pandemic hit, it was really crucial that they had to use data, they had to use analytics to figure out, how can they shift the revenue from physical outlets to online, right? How can they actually figure out, who their customers are and which ones are actually ripe for cross-selling and different types of promotions. And it sounds logical, but when you have 40 different subsidiaries and data is literally in different physical locations, physical silos, different clouds, and large amounts of it, it's much more difficult than it seems. And trying to rely on the few people who actually can use it has always become a bottleneck for a lot of organizations, right? And so what we really want to empower Promethium, we believe every organization should have is, yes, it's great to have data available, but you still really need to empower not just the culture, but also skill sets where everyone can actually has the capability of actually, finding and then being able to leverage that data to make very important business insights.
So it's really interesting what you mentioned there. I mean, I'm not, it's like, I almost don't know where to begin. I think it's probably a problem that's fairly analogous to the problem that you tackle, which is essentially helping your customers find needles in the haystack. I'm first going to basically ask you an initial question, then I want to bring Andrew back in. But the first part is that a lot of the problems that you're talking about, challenges you're talking about, we've had before the pandemic. How has the pandemic changed that? Find that needle in the haystack. Basically developing the right skill sets, the right culture. And those are, as I said, I'm going to want to bring Andrew in on that as well. But let me start with you, Kaycee, which is how's the pandemic changed this?
I think if I were to sum it up in one word, I would say speed, right? I think speed became way more important. It was, I think I don't think there's any customer we talked to before the pandemic that said, we don't want to be a data-driven organization. We don't want to make data-driven decisions. I couldn't find it, right? Maybe we're just lucky. But what we found was when you actually looked at their processes, oh yes, it takes us, 3 weeks to find the data. It takes us another 4 weeks to prep the data. It takes another month to actually ETL the data and then to transfer the data. And by the time we go back and forth, maybe after 4 months, we've answered the question. That the business, and by the way, I at first I thought, okay, you're pulling my leg. That can't be the case. And you start finding that across the board, how common it was. And so with the pandemic hit, it was very interesting. That shift just happened overnight. All of a sudden, people were saying, this can't happen. We can't take 4 months to answer questions. We're not sure inventory levels will be there after 4 months. So we need to make these fast decisions now. And so the metric literally went from months to minutes. And the bar, that became the acceptable bar. Like if you can't answer this question in 4 minutes or less, and that included the traditional process of discovery, move ETL prep, and doing complex queries and so forth. That is what we actually saw happen time and time again. And it's quite refreshing to see that because I think having the data is great, being able to make use of it is even better. And so that timeliness is really what we saw a lot of these customers, how they were able to very quickly pivot on a dime and react to the changing market conditions and positively impact their business.
And so I'm going to open this up to both of you there, which is okay. It sounds fine and good to basically do things faster. We've been saying this all along. It's now become actually, a necessity, and even more than ever. But how do we do that? The steps that we have to do haven't changed. Maybe the processes, maybe the culture has to change. So I'd like to throw it open to both of you. Andrew, let's start with you, and then in Kaycee, we'll come back to you there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to my culture point. Like, I think if a lot of companies still approach data analysis in a very central way, like, we'll have a central group, bring all the data together. We'll have a central group do all my reporting, and that works for some things, but ultimately, I think it ends up holding the business back, right? So we have to focus on, yes, getting some really well curated data together. The data that is the most important to the business that could be remixed with other things inside the business. Maybe that's got to be pulled together by a central group. But then you have to leverage the other people out in the business and their curiosity and their ability to bring their own data and to remix their data in other ways. And then have that supportive community around them where people can give them the feedback on, are you looking at this right? Is this the right way that we should be applying this data to business? I think is just part of building that healthy culture of debate and experimentation and the use of data to answer questions.
Kaycee, what's your take?
Yeah, I'm a simple guy, so I'll kind of summarize them into three bullet points. The first one I think is we've had this challenge forever because we've created silos for ourselves, right? My data warehouse is here, my database is here, and then my cloud is here. And oh, by the way, marketing doesn't like this cloud, so they went with that cloud. And so we impose these physical barriers to ourselves that made it really hard. And so I think one of the big things that's changed is now there's actually technologies to actually allow you to actually get to all that data very quickly, right? Case in point, our friends here at Trinio being able to do that. So I think that's important to kind of embrace this data federation, data virtualization to break apart the boundaries. The second thing is I always say, data analytics is a team sport, right? It's not one guy or gal or one team doing it. You really need this collaboration between the people who actually know what they're looking for in terms of the technical skill sets and know how to get it, and the people who know what to do with it once they see it, right? The people who have the business context. And oftentimes what we find is even in those tasks, it's siloed, right? Tell me what you want and then leave me alone for 2 months. And then hopefully after 2 or 3 months, I'm gonna give you something. Oh, it's wrong. Whoops, let me do it again. And you'd be shocked at how often this is. And what we found is that we don't do this in our everyday life. We get things done very quickly because we can collaborate and communicate in real time. And so why shouldn't data analytics be the same way? And so what we're finding now is people are now realizing this and demanding, no, it should be the same way. So it's actually creating that change. And the third is skill set, right? I think for a long time, it was centralized in one department, one team to do. And so those are the only people, the anointed ones who have the skill sets to actually do this. And what we're finding is there's advancements in technology to make things as simple as, like natural language, for example, right? It's something that, Tableau does with Ask Data, Promethium does to just make it so if you use Google, if you know how to type in a question, you should be able to get what you're looking for very quickly, right? And so I think with these big shifts, it's really allowed people to now actually go from months to minutes to get their answers. It actually is physically possible now.
Well, let's take it from that. There are a couple questions that I have here. Clearly, we're getting over, let's say, that coding gap. There still is basically, there's a skill about knowing how to use data and how to turn that, and how to understand, is this the right data? Am I using the right data to make the right decision? What are the skill sets that we need to internalize in terms of knowing how to use data?
Yeah, no, that is a great question. It's a core part of that data literacy piece I talked about before. And I think the core of data literacy really is around critical thinking, right? It's around really being able to think deeply about a question that you need answered or a problem that you need solved, and imagine the data that you need for it, or be able to select the data that you need for it. And you brought up Ask Data before. Ask Data lets people get started very, 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 very quickly, and it takes away that coding back, or that coding requirement, or even that drag and drop requirement for certain kinds of questions. but you have to know that you're asking the right question of a certain data set.
Mhm.
And that I think is, that's incumbent upon like the education that we take people through now. It's incumbent on those communities that we build. You get a bunch of people that are working working with data inside a community, and they can give each other feedback and they can teach each other. That is a big part of, I think, doing this at its scale inside of an organization.
So basically, Kaycee, basically, you're further upstream in the process. What are the types of skills that you need in order to basically understand? Am I looking for the right needle in this haystack? I can find a needle. Is it the right one?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I think, we actually, after surveying, hundreds of customers, we actually kind of, realized that different organizations are going to try and empower people with different skills. And unfortunately, you actually don't see that much uniformity. I hate to tell you, Tony, across all the different companies. But so we kind of go back to, human nature, like what is the easiest thing and most intuitive? And what we found, and then again, I'll go back to collaboration, is that for something like what's the right data, oftentimes there are people in the organization that quickly know and can tell you it's the right one or it's the wrong one, or, hey, I know exactly what you're trying to do because I've been here for 10 years and you should start with this. And what traditionally we've relied on, tribal knowledge. Do I know how to find that person, right? Or have I bought him lunch in the last 3 weeks, so he's going to be nice to me and actually get back to me? And what we found is, with approaches and technologies like Promethium, is being able to really not just find the right data, but find the people who know and can actually tell you, you might want to start here, or yeah, this will get it to you. However, right, what we've seen is, popularity, right? Crowdsourcing, like this, I think it's right, but how come it's only been used one time in the last 6 months? Whereas, wow, this one's actually been used, 300 times in the last week. Maybe that's the one I should start with first, right? And so what we found is that human beings, we're social creatures, right? We use Yelp in our daily lives, and we find that actually, the crowdsourcing, even as simple as 1 star, 4 star, something like that really helps pinpoint people. And that's something that Promethium does that people really appreciate is anyone can kind of figure that out, right? Oh, wow, 4 stars, 300 users versus 1. Maybe at least I'm going to start there. And then through there, I know who's given the ratings. I can actually now have access to that subject matter expert. So we think that really complements a lot of the traditional approaches, right? Such as put in the annotations, put in the tags and so forth. The problem is if you're not even looking at the right annotations from the right person or the right tags, it doesn't really matter, right? And so having that ability to very quickly collaborate, I think it has made a big difference in allowing people to find that right proverbial needle in the haystack.
Crowdsourcing is a very powerful idea, which I'm sure, Andrew, you would not have any disagreement with. The last question that I want to address here is, okay, makes sense. For instance, that we need to basically that we need to basically up our game in data literacy. Need to up our game in collaboration, because the fact is any one person is not going to know everything. We need to basically borrow off that collective knowledge without getting into the trap of quote unquote what they used to call knowledge management. That this needs to be organic. But behind all this is making sure that we make the proper use of data. We got into this topic last time, but I'm going to ask this at a much higher level here, which is that as we are developing data literacy, how do we also develop a culture, sort of, an awareness of how to use data properly?
Yeah, I think that is actually one question that all our customers come to us and tackle, to help them tackle, right? Because they say, hey, great, you've helped me break down the barriers, you helped me gotten it fast. Now, how do I make sure, when it's so easy and so available, how do I make sure it's not abused, right? And this is where, look, you do have to have proper governance, right? Governance is not a buzzword, right? You do have to have proper policies, you do have to have proper role-based access, and you do have to have proper controls. I think these concepts we all had, they were just implemented in a very serial and slow manner, right? A lot of organizations embrace this, but when you talk to them about how it was actually implemented, the number one complaint you heard was, well, it took 6 months for them to tell me I could use the data. So, I couldn't use it, or I found a way around it. Haha, right? I found this is where shadow IT came about. And so this is where I go back to, like, the concepts are good. However, that ability to actually very quickly, pass that information and figure out who needs to use what, that is actually very critical, right? I mean, I'll use a everyday example, for example, that we all probably use during the pandemic, right? We probably use DoorDash, Uber Eats, Postmates, the food delivery app. You notice one of the coolest things about those things is they always tell you at what step of the order process you're in. Mm-hmm. Kitchens receive your order. Kitchens start cooking. Food is done. Drivers on their way. And it's something as little as that visibility into where you are in the process actually give people confidence and visibility of what's happening. And so that's something that we've really embraced at Promethium is don't leave people in the dark, right? So when you say there is a steward, for example, who needs to get involved, let people know, hey, Andrew is now looking at this question and looking at the data that you're asking for, and Andrew now has specifically what he needs to look at. And if Andrew's been looking at it for 3 days, maybe it's time to ping Andrew and say, dude, help me out here, man. Help a brother out. Why are you taking so long?
Andrew, not too much pressure here.
No. I'm just picking on Andrew here. He would never take 3 days to answer my question. I know that. He's a good guy.
I hope not.
but something like that actually can go a really long way. Just that visibility and the ability to communicate. Because sometimes we all get busy and you realize, oh my gosh, I've sat on this for 3 days. And so again, I think it's taking what the good ideas that we have, but implement it in a way that we're all used to allow that instant visibility so that people can actually now trust the process. Because that was the biggest thing. The reason why people did this shadow IT was because they didn't trust the process. I'm not sure you're going to give the data back to me in less than 6 months, so I'm not even going to bother asking, was what we saw a lot of. But if I know and Andrew knows, hey man, we both know when this question was asked and we both know when the SLA is for delivery, right? Now there's trust. I better get it back to him in 10 minutes, right? And so now people can follow that process. Like, great, I'm okay waiting for 10 minutes for Andrew to get it back to me.
Andrew, so what do you make about on that issue of building trust in data?
Yeah, no, building trust in data is super important. I totally agree with Kaycee's points on governance and visibility. I think, if we rewind a couple of decades in our industry, governance meant security. Governance meant locking things down and going back to that, that high priesthood of people that had access to the data. I think governance now is this combination of security and visibility, but that visibility piece is so important because we have to know how data is being used. The only other thing that I would add to this whole thing around trust in data, would be the sort of ethics piece of it. We've started to have companies that have like little ethics groups inside that are looking at the way they're using data or making decisions about technology, and I think that's an important piece of this too. I was at a meeting on sort of the use of data at one point, and the maxim that the group that was presenting had was, don't be creepy. Like, look at what you're doing. And if you're like, wow, that's really creepy, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. So I think that ethics piece is really important as well, because if you're not thinking about it in that dimension, like getting to that trust with a broad group of people, I think is going to be really difficult.
Right. What it really comes down to, and I think, just the takeaway I'm getting from both of you here is that obviously things, as I said, we had this conversation a year ago. We might be talking about the same things, but similar topics. But it probably seemed a lot more theoretical a year ago. And what it really comes down to today is that we really need to up our game, and we really need, and in so doing, as we become more virtual, we have to become much more closely in touch. We need to essentially to really harness essentially within our own organizations the power and the knowledge of crowds, but also we need basically people to think about what they're doing, and it's not just a matter of governance rules and regulations of you cannot do this, you cannot do that. We have to basically internalize. It almost gets to be instinctual, given the fact that we now have greater power and greater visibility into incredible amounts of data that in the wrong hands, basically, if we, could be, there could be real consequences. But anyway, I would like to, Kaycee and Andrew, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. This has been a fascinating conversation. And I know we've just really, we just scratched the surface here. So we'll reconvene for our next 5 hours shortly, but not today.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much,
Tony.
And thank you everybody for joining
Bye,
us.
Kaycee.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you to our great panelists. I don't know how I would have navigated the pandemic without the Starbucks drive-thru, so I found that story really interesting. We'll take a 2-minute break and be right back to talk about data governance at one of the most fascinating companies I've ever encountered, Rakuten.